This right here is a compost pile, right? Now, one thing you might not know about making hot compost is that if I flip too early, then I'm not killing the weed seeds, the pathogens, all the bad guys, right? The whole point of doing a hot compost pile. And if I flip too late, then I'm killing everything. Flipping the compost is just as important as the composition of the compost. So that's exactly what we're going to go over today, is when is the correct way, or when is the correct time to flip your compost, and also what is the correct way of flipping your compost to boost maximum heat, beneficial maximum heat, and increase the speed of decomposition within your compost pile. Now, before we get into that, remember my parents are putting on a Sovereign Health Summit next October in North Carolina. A bunch of awesome people are going to be there. Barbara O'Neill, and then the rest I can't even mention on YouTube or else I'll get kicked off. But there's a little video here. We'll show you some of the people. And if you know some of the people that are going to be out there, then feel free to leave it down below in the comments, because that's a little loophole. Tickets are for sale down below in the description box. Also, if you would like a permaculture consultation, hit up the email down below. And if you'd like a soil biology test, kind of on topic for what we're doing here today, if you want me to look at the biology of your soil or your compost or whatever it may be and determine if it's, good to go, or if there's more biology we need to incorporate in it, then hit up the email down below as well. Consultations, soil tests, both the same email. And if you want to learn everything that I know about permaculture, then hit up the permaculture design course over on Patreon. That's linked down below as well. That being said, let's get into, now that I have this cage off, let's get into the correct time to flip your compost, and then also the correct method of flipping your compost. What is the point of getting it hot? We are killing all of the pathogenic microbes, right? Those are all anaerobic guys. We're killing all the anaerobic guys that can't stand high temperatures, right? Anaerobic guys and aerobic guys are different in that the aerobic guys can withstand high temperatures for an extended period of time, but the anaerobic guys can't withstand those temperatures and can't withstand the high oxygen conditions as well. That can be very dirty with the ingredients, meaning they can be covered in disease. The ingredients can be covered in disease, blight, can be filled with weed seeds, all that type of stuff. But it's fine because there's going through the hot process, the hot composting process that's going to kill all those guys. That's one of the downsides of cold composting, is that there's no cleansing process in making the compost. So you have to be very, very careful with your compost ingredients, or else you're just going to get a bunch of seeds or weed seeds growing on the back end, or you're just going to be pushing pathogens all through your garden, which is the opposite of what we want. So that is what's determining when to flip your compost. It's all based on temperature. So the temperatures we're looking for in the center is 131. Once it hits 131 degrees Fahrenheit, that's when the clock starts, to 145 is 3 days, right? That's how long you wait before you flip. And this is the temperature just above the center of the compost pile. So 145 to 155 is 2 days. 55 to 165, 1 day or 24 hours. And then anything between 165 to 171, basically anything over 165 immediately. Like as soon as you take that temperature, because you get to the risk of compost fire once you hit 171, because then you start producing vapors and they're combustible at 171, and you want to avoid compost fire. So if you take your temperature and it's 131, the clock starts 3 days. Now keep taking your temperature, because if during that period it keeps raising to 145, then your times are shortened. And then let's say it gets all the way up to 160. Well, then you wait 20, and then it stays at 160. You wait for 24 hours from the point of taking your temperature, and then that's when the clock starts. So don't be going out there like hitting 165 and then assume like, oh, well, it's probably been like this for 3 hours. There's no real way of knowing. So once it hits that time, once you go and check that time is the hard start for the timer. Now, what's creating the heat and the way we control the heat is by either adding or subtracting high nitrogen food sources, right? So those high nitrogen food sources are quickly feeding the bacteria, which is what's creating the heat in your compost pile. And them reproducing, replicating, feeding, all that type of stuff is what's actually creating the heat. And we control the heat by adding or subtracting high nitrogen food sources. Manures, those are high nitrogen inputs. Comfrey, for example, I just did a video on comfrey and moringa. Those are high nitrogen inputs. Think of your early spring grasses. Those are high nitrogen inputs too. Usually think of it this way, like the younger the plant is, the higher nitrogen it's gonna be. All right, so here's the overall setup and the materials you're gonna need. So I took the compost cage off, right? I took it off and then I reassembled it right here. And I'm flipping in the direction of where I'm gonna be storing and curing compost, right? It's gonna flip towards the compost bin. So reassembled the cage right here. And then the tarp that I had covering it, I have laid out right here. This is gonna come in handy because because of the way I'm going to flip this compost pile. Now we'll get into that in a minute, but the other materials I have is a pitchfork. This one is a 5-tine pitchfork. For really stringy materials, I like using a 3-tine pitchfork. For materials kind of like this, I like using a 5-tine pitchfork. Any more than that, then I notice you're just constantly banging your pitchfork trying to get materials off of it, especially when it's at the right moisture content and it starts breaking down a little bit more. And then right here we have our rake, so we can pick up loose materials or things that are falling off or out or whatever it may be. It comes in handy. So there's a bunch of different ways to actually flip a compost pile. Some people just like flip it over, just starting from the top, working their way down. That's fine and that will work, but there's a much more efficient way to flip your compost, your hot compost pile, right? So it's best if I picture this compost pile in thirds, right? So I have the top third, which is going to act as like a covering, right? Because my middle is going to be a hot molten ball in the center of this compost pile. So if I picture the center as a ball, then there's going to be like the sides right here. I would count this as a top. Even though it's more towards the middle of the compost pile, it's on the outside, so I'm considering it top. And then the bottom does the same thing. The bottom is going to act like a bowl. So I have the top, which drapes over the hot middle, and then I have the center, which is going to be a hot ball, and then I have the bottom, which is going to act as like a flat bottom and a cup holding that hot ball. So 3 different sections, and here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to peel away my top layer first. And as I peel it away, I'm gonna shake it out and I'm gonna put it on this tarp right over here. And what this does is gonna enable me to flip this pile in thirds. And if I do everything right, this will be the first flip, and then I'll flip it one more time, and then after that, I'll flip it into my cage. So 3 flips if I do everything right. And that's a lot better than the 9 flips in an 18-day compost pile, right? So I'd much rather flip 3 times than 8 or 9 times or even more. But if I need to add more water, this is when I will get that done. And it's not like you didn't fail because you have to add more water. You're perfectly fine adding more water if you need to. The reason you want to break up the clumps is because that's the center of those clumps is where anaerobic activity occurs, and like we established earlier, we want to avoid anaerobic conditions and we want to maintain aerobic conditions, because the bad guys live in the anaerobic conditions and the good guys tend to live in aerobic conditions. Now, just with the high temperatures we had lately underneath that blue tarp, I am going to need to water this down a little bit. So it's super easy while it's on the tarp. You can spread it out on the tarp and then you can kind of water everything evenly. And the best test for checking moisture within a compost pile is to take 2 handfuls of it, squeeze it together, and then you should have 1 drop form and fall from the handful. And if you don't, it's too dry, and if you have a stream trickling down, it's too wet. If it's too dry, add water. If it's too wet, then just dig a hole in the chimney, or a chimney in the compost pile, and then it'll evaporate and burn off and stuff like that. All right, so now I'm ready to flip the middle. So I took off the cap, put it on the tarp. That's going to be the top. Now I'm going to flip the middle. The middle is going to go directly into the cage, right? So if you think of it in 3 sections, each section is just moving down 1. So the old top is going to become the new middle, the old middle is going to become the new bottom, and then the old bottom is going to become the new top. Now, before I start flipping into this cage, I want to wet everything down in this cage, especially right now, especially if you have dry conditions lately. You don't want the ground to actually be robbing any moisture from your compost pile. Now, if you're doing it on top of a pallet, which would be slightly better, a pallet lined with hardware cloth, then you don't need to wet it down first. But if you're doing it still on the ground, like I am right here, then you're gonna wanna wet the ground first just to, you know, inhibit extra moisture loss, especially if you're in a warmer climate like I am here in Texas. All right, so that's watered down. Now I'm gonna start flipping the center of this compost pile. Now you can flip it, you can shake it out here in the center first and then move it as one shaken out clump if you want to. That's a route too. But you wanna make sure you're avoiding any clumps, because once again, it is very important, that's why I'm repeating it, you want to avoid any anaerobic conditions, and what's going on in the center of that clump is nothing but anaerobic conditions. Now this white stuff you see right here, right? That is not fungi. A lot of people will claim that that stuff is fungi right there. Given these conditions, it's way too hot for fungal activity to occur, so we know it's not fungi. So given these conditions, we can narrow it down and say that this is actinobacteria, which is actually a long filamentous bacteria that is a facultative bacteria. So I know that, man, that stuff is hot. Yeah, dang. But I know that I'm right in between the aerobic and anaerobic stage, 4 to 6 parts per million of oxygen in the soil, whenever I have this much actinobacteria active within my compost pile, which isn't a bad thing because this is the first flip. Like, we want to get pretty close because we want those high temperatures, which is perfectly fine. So if you see actinobacteria in your compost pile and it's the first or second flip, then you're perfectly good. If you're seeing it in the third flip, then I would say it probably needs to cool down, or maybe needs to go through another flip before you go to the curing phase. Now keep in mind, the center is the only part of this compost pile that's gone through that cleansing thermophilic phase, right? The top and the old top and then the old bottom are not clean yet. They're not good to go. So if I were to add any kind of ingredients at this point, I would only add it to the old top or the old bottom, because the ingredients themselves haven't gone through that cleansing phase. So I'm not going to add it to the top. I'm sorry, I'm not going to add it to the old middle, right? All right, so now the old center from this pile is now the new bottom for the new cage. Now I'm going to move on over to my tarp where I have the old top, right? And I'm just going to pick up each corner and kind of, especially if you didn't mix the ingredients on the front end while compiling your compost pile, then you can kind of mix it together on this tarp if you wanted to. But what I'm doing right now is just kind of collecting all the material to the center to make it easy to scoop, because now this is going to become my new center. Now, I should say the order doesn't really matter. Like, whatever order you want to do it in, perfectly fine. The only thing that matters is that all 3 sections go through the hot thermophilic center. That is the important part. Now, things have dried out a little bit more than expected, just because it's still 90s and stuff like that here in Texas. So I'm going to add just a little bit more water to all parts of this compost. And then from here, I'm just going to scoop it into the cage. And now it's time to flip this bottom third, which the bottom third is always easiest to flip because it's the only one that's left. You can kind of be a little, not sloppy, but you don't have to be as careful with not mixing ingredients and everything. You can really shake this one out, and then you're going to be good to go. And then this one was also the easiest. It's like whatever's left. There's no figuring out like, all right, is this enough? Is this the center? Where does the center stop? Nope. It's just whatever's left is the bottom, and you're going to flip that, and it's going to become the new top. And then the next flip, it'll become the new center. So the first bottom is the last one to go through that thermophilic phase if you follow this pattern. Like I said before, you don't have to follow this exact pattern. It's just important that all 3 sections of the compost go through that thermophilic phase. Now, while I flip this third section, I get asked a lot of questions about compost, as you would imagine. Now, one of the most popular questions that I get is, what do I think about... Now, keep in mind, I love David the Good. There's no shade on David the Good at all. But I get asked a lot about his fetid, sorry, I gotta move this tripod, his swamp water, right? Where you take a bunch of like grasses, vegetation, stuff like that, and then you throw it in a bucket full of water, and then you let it set and decompose, and then you add that to your garden. Well, I'm not saying that those methods don't work. They absolutely work. They definitely work. It will benefit your garden, but you're stuck doing that year after year, multiple times a season, things like that. I'm looking for a permanent solution. So something that I can stop fooling with after I fixed it. And that's what this aerobic compost is going to allow me to do. I'm inoculating the soil with the correct microbes that then provide an on-demand system for my plants. So instead of having like whatever the plant needs just suspended in the soil, and every time it rains it forces the plant to take up what it needs, or sometimes what it doesn't even need, instead of going that route, I'm going to make sure the organisms are in place, so that way they, as the plant needs it, they can go and get exactly what the plant needs on an on-demand system. Now in this method, if I were to do an NPK test or a mineral test or just nutrient test in the soil, at any given point I might be low on things that plants actually, really need. But that's perfectly fine, because I don't need a lot of it. I just need the right amount at the right time when the plant needs it. And that's what the organisms go and do. And that's the whole point of compost. Compost, like the material itself, is pretty useless. Like, it's not. And this is the importance behind compost. This is why I put so much time and effort in teaching compost and in making compost and things like that, is that this can fix all of the problems on your farm, all the fertility issues, all of the pests, all of the disease, all of the blight, the low yields at the time of harvest, stuff like that. This compost can fix all of that. I can get rid of the possibility of pests. I can get rid of the possibility of disease, because I have a standing army of microbes that are covering the plant itself and then inoculating in the soil, which act as like a little body armor, standing guard, standing armor, or standing army, things like that. That's the reason I spend so much time wanting to make compost. Now, back to the swamp water and the Jadam method. Now, they work, but I keep having to do it over and over again because I'm using anaerobic creatures, right? I'm using anaerobic microbes, which are the opposite of what I want to achieve in my soil. If I have anaerobic soil, I might have the nutrients that that plant needs, but I'm also harboring the environment for your pests and for your diseases and for your fungi and for your, like the negative fungi, molds, mildews, things like that. And I'm also stuck in the loop of applying it year after year. Or I could do a one-time, put a lot of effort into the compost, do a one-time fix, and as long as I don't create compaction or anaerobic conditions, it is a permanent fix. That's what I'm looking for. So those are my thoughts on. And then similarly, that's the downside of using cold compost or doing cold compost methods, is that it's basically just more anaerobic conditions or anaerobic compost, and I'm gonna have to keep making it year after year, over and over again, until I quit farming or gardening or whatever it may be. So I'd rather go the compost route. So here we go. We have one finished or one flipped compost pile, right? So at this point, I'm gonna start re-monitoring the temperatures, right? So about 6 hours from now, I'm gonna check the temperature again. The tip of the compost thermometer just in the center of the pile, just a slightly above the middle, because that's gonna be the hottest point. And then once that temperature hits a minimum of 131, then the clock starts over. Now, if everything worked out perfectly, then I only need to flip this 2 times. Or 3 times, I'm sorry, 2 times just to get every single section through that hot thermophilic phase. The 3rd time being flipped into the curing box facility, whatever you guys have for curing, letting the ambient temperature come down. So after I get done my flips and I flip it into the curing box, I want to make sure I'm keeping it there until the center of the compost pile has come down to ambient temperature. So if it's like Texas and it's 90 degrees outside, then you're gonna wait till the ambient temperature of the center of the compost pile comes close to 90 degrees. That's when your fungi is gonna start hatching from the spores, and it's gonna start populating this compost pile. And then about a month after the curing starts, that's when you wanna start using it in your gardens, just to make sure you have what's called biocomplete compost, which is where like enough levels or the numbers of all these particular organisms are high enough to, basically be pretty good compost, about like everything you could ask for in a compost pile in your soils. That's biocomplete. So you have enough bacteria, you have enough fungi, you have enough ciliates, you have enough flagella, you have enough, not necessarily ciliates because those are kind of in between guys, but you have enough microarthropods, macroarthropods, nematodes, the good nematodes, things like that. And if you want to find out if your stuff is at that level, then hit up the email down below, hit me up for a soil test. I can look at it underneath the microscope and determine what's there, what needs to be there, what we need to do to fix it, things like that. But that's what we're going to do with this compost pile now. Now I'm also going to tarp it. So I don't have it tarped right now, but just know that, you know, I'm going to tarp it before I'm all done out here. And then I'm going to wait again for it to heat back up, and then I'm going to do the second flip. And after the second flip, all 3 sections of this compost pile has gone through that thermophilic, that hot thermophilic phase. So hopefully this answered a lot of questions for you guys. Hopefully this gave you a better understanding of like the reason behind specific methods in flipping your compost. And then if this method is new to you, then, you know, hopefully it's beneficial to you. Hopefully you find it a little bit easier to do than the 9 to 8 flips on the 18-day compost pile. Now, before I stop, also after your second or third flip, you notice that it's still very, very hot in the center, like it's still blowing off steam, you still have actinobacteria. Maybe let it flip one more time before putting it in the curing box, and then that last flip can just be willy-nilly. Like you can flip from top to bottom without sectioning it out, because all 3 sections have gone through that hot phase. You're just wanting the bacteria to go ahead and burn through that high nitrogen food before putting it in the curing box. If you put it in the curing box a little bit too early and it's still very, very hot, it's just going to take longer for it to come down to ambient temperature. Or you could flip it one more time and then speed up that heating up process, which I will say that is pretty common, to get to the end and realize like, my compost is still very, very hot. I'm going to go ahead and do it, flip it one more time. But it just takes a little bit of dialing, a little bit of practice. Once you get through, you know, a couple of compost piles, you should have it down pretty well and understand what ingredients work, how much moisture it needs, things like that. So I'm going to just water this a little bit more, and then I'm going to cover it with the tarp, and then that's it. I'm just waiting for the temperatures to come back up, and then it's good to go. So hopefully this video was helpful for you guys. Can't wait to see you guys next year at the Sovereign Health Summit. It's going to be awesome. Can't wait to see you guys. If you need a consultation, hit up the email, soil test, email, Patreon, PDC, Permaculture Design Course. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you next time.